Hi everyone and welcome to TYT. So today we are going to talk about Trump and the election because why not? We're also going to talk about climate change and how a Trump presidency is going to impact our climate change policy. And to talk about these topics, we have a very special guest, Joe Romm, in the studio. He is the founding editor of Climate Progress and a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Rolling Stone magazine has called Joe one of the 100 people who are changing America, and Time magazine has named you as one of our heroes of the environment, as well as being the world's most influential climate blogger. This is for a guy who doesn't mince his words. Joe Romm, everyone.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, Bernie Sanders just shared a post of yours, and it's been shared over 20,000 times since then. In the piece, you talk about Reince Priebus and Donald Trump and how they believe climate change is a bunch of bunk. Their words, not yours. Is climate change a bunch of bunk?
No. Climate change.
Shock.
I know it's shock you. Climate science is something, the thousands of the world top scientists have been studying this for decades, and kind of every 5 years they report to us, and we don't do anything, and then they kind of yell a little louder the next 5 times. But we have in Paris last December, 200 nations, including ours, unanimously agreed that the world has to reduce carbon pollution because and keep total warming below 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, in order to avoid catastrophe. So globally, everyone gets this. This is as well understood scientifically as the fact that cigarettes are harmful, and that people use that analogy. We are certain that humans are the primary cause of climate change and that climate change is dangerous, as we are that smoking tobacco is bad for your health.
Now, when is climate change going to start?
Well, we're already seeing climate change. Climate change is created by the burning of coal, oil, and gas primarily, also deforestation, and this has been with us for 250 years. It's really taken off since
But the climate hasn't warmed yet, right?
the climate has warmed actually about almost a full degree Celsius, 1.6, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and since the 50s. And virtually all of that is due to humans. And so when you see something like Superstorm Sandy hitting New York, that storm surge, according to the scientists, that storm surge was made twice as likely because of climate change and sea level rise, because sea level rise melts ice, melting ice raises the seas. When you heat up the planet, you put more water vapor in the atmosphere, it comes down in the wet areas, get wetter. But heat also makes dry areas get drier, so things like the California drought get more intense. So you get this combination of more extreme weather, basically, coupled with sea level rise. We're pouring carbon dioxide into the ocean, that acidifies it. So our coral reefs, you've probably been reading about the Great Barrier Reef, is getting totally devastated. And we have this TV series I'm chief science advisor on, which is Years of Living Dangerously, which is on National Geographic
with
channels.
Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Cameron.
Yeah.
Among many other celebrities.
And Asif Manvi and Bradley Whitford, and it's on Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock.
Tune in.
On National Geographic, and we just go to different places in the world. Jack Black went down to Miami, where sea level rise is already, on perfectly clear days, you get flooding from these high tides, which are called king tides, and it's just going to get worse and worse until Miami Beach is no longer inhabitable. And if we don't reverse our emissions trends, then Miami itself is going to get severely flooded.
Now, we're recording this interview from New York City, a city of islands in an ocean, and we're recording it at the end of what has been the hottest year in recorded human history. So it's exciting and changing times that we live in. We're really at the tip of this change, and the future is unknown. So I want to talk to you a little bit about people who believe that it's bunk, people who believe that it's a catastrophe and we've already gone too far. And then there's people in the middle who think that maybe there's something we can still do about climate change. Where would you be on that spectrum?
Well, look, there's no question that if the world did what all the world's nations agreed to in Paris last December, then we would in fact keep total warming below catastrophic levels. The thing is that requires a lot of effort,
Mm.
because Paris people were making commitments through the year 2025 or 2030, but the entire world has to go to zero sometime in the second half of the century. So
Mhm.
that means no net burning of coal, oil, and gas.
And that's only if we start heading in the downward
Right,
trajectory.
right. The longer you wait, the faster you would have to cut, and at some point you've gone too far. So, I would say the world was on a knife's edge,
Mhm.
and we had just turned the corner. China had made a deal with the U.S. back in 2014. That was a very big deal with the Obama administration in China. China agreed to, for the first time ever, the biggest polluter, the developing country, said we were going to cap emissions.
I believe it's pronounced China.
China. By 2030.
Yeah.
And in fact, they're already peaking in coal, or getting close to that, or plateauing in coal. So China has done a lot. U.S., every country has made a contribution. Now, does that mean that we're going to do enough every few years? We don't know. As you say, that's what we didn't know. But when you elect a guy like Donald Trump, he campaigned on killing the Paris Agreement and on rolling back domestic U.S. The Clean Power Plan, that was the EPA pollution standards for new power plants that Obama put out there based on the Clean Air Act, existing authority that had been approved by the Supreme Court several years ago. So if you replace an Obama who is working with the rest of the world to reduce emissions, and then replace him with someone who has campaigned on bringing back the coal industry, which, by the way, sorry, coal miners, it's just not going to happen, and pushing fossil fuels as hard as possible and killing the global deal, then you're on the knife's edge. You're going to fall, in the wrong direction. So yes, Trump can do irreversible harm, and that is why he needs to be fought. That's why I wrote that post. The sixth stage of grief is activism.
Which brings me to my next question: activism as the sixth stage of grief. I mean, a lot of people they felt like they were grieving after the shock of this election that no one really saw coming except for Cenk on the Young Turks. So if people do want to do something, and if activism is the sixth stage of grief, the going and doing of something, what should we do?
Well, a good start, go to climateprogress.org. I'm sure your viewers read Think Progress already. It's the largest rapid response to the bullshit and all of the disinformation that's out there. And now that we are in a world where the chief strategist for Donald Trump, the senior advisor in the White House, is going to be
media guy
from Breitbart,
yeah,
like the guy who popularized fake news.
yeah.
We're going to need pushback, and I wrote a post on the 9 things you can do, so I recommend people do that. Certainly it's time to get active. You find the issue you're passionate about, there is a group to get involved with, because quite literally what we do in the next few years is going to determine the next few hundred years on the climate side. Because the thing about climate change, which makes it so worrisome and morally horrible, is that whatever climate change we inflict on the world will be irreversible for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So
if you melt ice that's been building up for 1,000 years, it takes 1,000 years to come back.
I mean, if you put an ice cube on the table in your home, and if your home is set to 32, well, it's going to start to melt a little bit. But the point is, once you warm it up and it melts to water, and you wanted to refreeze it back to an ice cube, then you'd have to, it's not going to happen. You'd have to totally drop the temperature incredibly, incredibly cold. So yes, there are certain changes: melting the great ice sheets, raising sea levels, turning semi-arid cropland into a dust bowl that simply can't be undone for centuries and centuries. So that's why those of us are so who are concerned about this are saying we need to get active. We need to fight this every step of the way.
I'd always been slightly smug because I thought my generation is going to be the generation that stood on the right side of history, changed things, reversed track away from what had been happening in the past. And now I might be that generation that who's going to ruin it for everyone. So it's kind of
No,
terrifying.
it's too late. It's too late because it was the baby boomers that did the
Blame the
ruining.
baby
You
boomers.
can you can blame the baby boomers. I mean, I'm a baby boomer, and we would always, admonish our kids, clean up after yourself, don't, trash the house. But here it is, the baby boomers have gone out and we have used up the resources. We've been using up the soil, the fisheries, the coral reefs, and now the livable climate. And, we're my whole goal was, let's at least try to pass on a world
Mhm.
that can still be saved.
Yeah.
And so that's
High bars.
high bars. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that, I mean, it's in theory we're supposed to leave the world better than we found it.
Just please don't irreversibly trash it.
Exactly. That's what I was saying yesterday. If your goal, if you think you're here on Earth to help make it better than when you got here, well,
Yeah.
then we're all failing. So, the
It's hard to laugh, but that's
Yeah, well,
all you can really do.
but it definitely isn't too late. But the election of Donald Trump is as big a setback to progressive causes in general, and the climate, as is imaginable. And
I want to talk a little bit
yeah,
about that.
yeah,
I want to switch gears and talk about
please.
how Donald Trump got elected in the first place. So you've had some pretty interesting things to say in your book, Language Intelligence, which I have here. If you're shopping for Christmas presents, get into it. It's lessons in persuasion from Jesus, Shakespeare, Lincoln, and Lady Gaga. Now, it sure feels like Donald Trump got a copy of your book and was using all the tricks here.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump is whatever all the negative things you want to think about. He has one particular talent, which is branding, which is
Brander in chief.
brand in chief, which is a communication style that was developed 25 centuries ago. This is emotional communications. It used to be called rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on the figures of speech and irony and metaphor and all these things, repetition, alliteration, all these things that are memory tricks
Mm-hmm.
that get thoughts into people's heads. And the marketing industry figured out in the last 50 years, they spent a lot of money. How do we sell products? How do we get you to remember, Meow Mix? Well, we say meow, 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 and how do we get you to remember the Aflac duck?
Yeah.
And so all of the memory tricks that were codified by the Greeks and then the Romans and then the Elizabethans. The height of it in English was the works of Shakespeare, the King James Bible. These are the classic works of rhetoric. And as I tell people now, go see Hamilton
Yeah.
or download it. That's the way communications is done. And, Trump understood some of this. I have this quote from The Art of the Deal, which
Yeah.
is a 1987 bestseller. He says, the final key to the way I promote is bravado. I play to people's fantasies. People may not always think big themselves, but they can still get very excited by those who do. That's why a little hyperbole never hurts. People want to believe that something is the biggest and grandest and most spectacular. And he says, I call it truthful hyperbole, an innocent form of exaggeration and a very effective form of promotion. Well, as we've seen, it's not so
very
innocent.
effective and
It
not
is
so
very
innocent.
effective. And hyperbole is one of the classic figures of speech.
Yeah.
It is a form of exaggeration. Usually it's often metaphorical exaggeration, very over the top stuff. Like, I'm going to build a wall and make the Mexicans pay for it.
Yeah.
Now, no one, I mean, even a lot of his supporters know that's not going to happen. But as an expression of, I get your anger,
Yeah.
and I'm expressing it, it works. And indeed, hyperbole, and this is something that Aristotle talked about, he said, hyperboles, quote, show vehemence of character, and that is why angry people use them more than other people.
Yeah, because when you're angry, you're like, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna build a wall, and I'm gonna make Mexico pay. It's exactly the way you talk when you're angry.
Yeah, I'm gonna punch you so hard, you'll have to talk through, those sorts of things. So yes, so the interesting thing is that even though these are all false, his voters don't judge them for being false. His voters judge them. Does he reflect the way I feel?
Yeah.
And I'm angry.
Yeah.
So he's expressing anger. They don't care that it's a load of bullshit. And in fact, the fact that it is hyperbole and that he gets the anger, that connects with him. And he does a lot of other tricks. There's this other trick where he says, about Bush. I was going to say dummy. I won't say it. I won't say it. Or I refuse to call Megyn Kelly a bimbo because that wouldn't be politically correct. So when you say you're not going to call someone a liar, but you've just called them a liar.
You just said they're a liar.
So that's actually a figure of speech. It was invented 25 centuries ago by the Greeks. Cicero practiced it all the time. When he was debating his opponents, he would say, I'm not going to talk about my opponent's dishonest past or all the terrible things he did.
But he's just reminded you of
Right,
it. Yeah.
exactly. So it's a beautiful way of making it look like, oh, I'm above that,
Yeah.
but in fact, you're sinking to that level. So he does that all the time. He says that about every single thing. So when you look at effective emotional communications, he does it. Some of it he studied, but most of it 20 years of selling.
Yeah.
And what works and what doesn't. When all you're doing all day long is selling yourself, you quickly see what works with people, what doesn't. So, and that's the key. That's why I like blogging, because I get feedback.
Yeah.
So I get feedback very quickly, what works, what doesn't. So after 10 years, hopefully I get
a
better.
better writer.
Donald Trump has gotten very good at this one thing.
Yeah. Which, I mean, do you think, how would he compare if he was a 10? Where would you put Hillary Clinton on the scale of engaging with people emotionally?
Well, the Democrats, I'm a big Hillary fan, and I worked for her husband's administration, acting assistant secretary of energy efficiency. Disclaimer.
But
we tend she's never was the communicator, the emotional communicator that her husband was. And the I feel your pain. That's not, Hillary is your classic progressive wonk type. And I'm a progressive wonk type. That's why it took me 20 years to write Language Intelligence. It's the lessons on persuasion from Jesus, Shakespeare, Lincoln, and Lady Gaga, really studying it and unlearning what I learned getting a PhD in physics. Because you get a PhD in physics, you learn, what matters are the facts and numbers and being literal. Whereas what really works is storytelling, figurative language, and repetition, and all these things. So, look, Hillary has great skills, and she's a world-class debater.
Yep.
But in terms of conveying the story that I get you, and I feel what you feel, and I'm going to represent what you represent, that's not her strong suit. And we've had candidates in the past, I don't think I have to name them, but they're typically the ones who didn't get elected president.
Yeah.
The ones who get elected president, you're Bill Clinton, you're Barack Obama, these are people who know how to give a speech that bring people along, that create enthusiasm. So, it's
and so we're almost foolish to look at Hillary based on her and say these are the better policies. Well, maybe, but if you're not engaging emotionally with your voters, they're just never going to relate to you.
No, absolutely. Look, I tell people this because I talk to scientists. If you give a talk about how what we're doing to the planet, dumping all this carbon pollution, how it's going to destroy the planet and ruin people's lives and all this, but you give it in a clinical fashion, charts and stuff, people are going to have trouble believing you because there's a disconnect between what you're saying and your lack of moral outrage.
Yeah.
So I said, the fact of the matter is, if you're talking about something that's outrageous, express your genuine emotion. And the refusal to express a genuine emotion doesn't actually make you more credible. Maybe if you're addressing a bunch of other physicists, you're expected to be, it's just the facts.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the world, you have to be the human being that you are, and express the emotions that you are, and we do have speakers who do it, and I'm a very big fan of Elizabeth Warren. If you watch her speeches, she is one of the great narrative speakers. I know Randy Olson, who wrote Houston, We Have a Narrative is his latest book. He's an expert on narratives and storytelling. And
absolutely. And appeared on Nerd Alert as well for the TYT viewers.
If you can analyze a speech, is this a story? Is this a narrative? He has a very simple metric for doing so. And Elizabeth Warren, off the charts.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But your typical techno wonk is not telling stories, and stories are what engage people. And I have a 9.5-year-old daughter, and I have seen this. I
Hmm.
mean, look, by the age of 9.5, she has seen the same Disney stories. She'll watch the same movie 10, 20 times. And then she'll see 100 or 200 of these types of stories. They're all the same. The Disney stories, the Star Wars movies, the Toy Stories, are all these classic hero stories. But the point is, people from age 0 to whatever, they've learned their place in life by identifying with a character that they
Story.
are empathic with.
Yeah.
And you learn who the bad guys are by the way bad guys talk. And you learn who the good guys are and good
Good
women
girls. Yep.
are by the way they talk.
Yeah.
And for instance, your Harry Potter, your Luke Skywalker, your heroes have a lot of certainty and confidence in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So they talk in what you might say is bluster, but because they're the good guys, they win and they're doing the right thing. They
Yeah.
just have, the people who are kind of the villains, they're the ones who are kind of, sneaky and always too clever by half.
Yeah.
And I talk about in the book about, Shakespeare talks about this. And if you read Mark Antony's speech in Julius Caesar after Brutus's, he says, Brutus is an honorable man. And if I could speak as well as Brutus, then I could convince you to mutiny. But I'm
Wow.
just a regular guy, and I can only tell you the plain truth, and I can't use all these fancy words. And anyway, so the notion that your plain spoken person is more honest and expresses what they really believe and is and therefore you can trust them. He's a person who gets me, he'll do the right thing. That overpowers any policy list. And look, the facts do not generally persuade people. And as the simplest example, I just ask people to think a time in their life that they were persuaded to completely change their mind on a subject they felt strongly about.
No
Okay,
one can
that
think of one.
hardly ever happens.
Yeah.
Does it ever happen in a short time? No.
Yeah.
Does it happen because a total stranger has run a bunch of statistics at you? No. It happens because you get a heart attack or a close relative confides something in you, someone you trust. But the facts are not what cause people to seriously change the way they think in a short period of time. And it never has been true since the dawn of storytelling, which was, what Homer and the Bible, these are all the great stories passed through the ages.
I always use the example of sports. So we do every year, we
Yeah.
do this whole experiment where we play different teams off against each other in an effort to find the best one. We do multiple versions of this experiment and we get the right one. Do we all change our opinion on who the best team is? Of course not. You always go with the team that you emotionally have been following all your life. And no amount of experimentation or facts is going to change that. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit because you mentioned Hamilton before, and I know we're running out of time, but just briefly. Hamilton, obviously, the Broadway musical has been a huge success. Why? You've taken your daughter to see it?
I took my mother to see it in
Wow.
May. My daughter is next.
Yeah. Now, what is it about Hamilton that you've noticed?
Well, Hamilton is basic rap. And it's the one omission in this book because I didn't have what I consider to be the perfect example. But the next version I'm going to have, Miranda. So what rap is the figures of speech.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's alliteration, rhyme, internal rhyme, which is assonance and consonants. It's irony, it's metaphor. And so if you watch Hamilton, what you are doing is seeing the same thing that Homer did when he was telling the Iliad and the Odyssey verbal stories over 2 hours. And so, he says, I'm just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry.
Yeah.
So I'm just like my country. So that's a simile, a metaphor.
Yeah.
I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. So there you have the list of three and the repetition and the rhyme. And I'm not throwing away my shot.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not throwing my shot is, of course, amazing foreshadow and irony. I don't want to spoil this for you, but at the end, he's killed by Aaron Burr in a duel. I know this is going to be shocking to a lot of people, but he fires up.
Yeah.
He throws away his shot. So in the beginning, when he says, I'm not going to throw away my shot, he's saying my shot to be famous.
Yeah.
That's what he means. But it has the secondary meaning. That's the key to all of effective rhetorical communication is the multiple meanings.
Yeah.
That there's an ironic second meaning that only becomes clear by the end. And then you go back and say, oh my God, this whole play is an evolution of him getting his shot, and then the meaning of shot transforming, and then what made him famous kind of destroys him, if you know the story, and he can't give up the thing, his own impetuousness and arrogance, and ultimately at the end, though, he's still a good person.
Yeah.
And he throws away his shot, and that's his undoing. So anyway, the point is, that's what the elements, the figures of speech are the elements of great storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I downloaded the score, the libretto, the full. There is no words in it. It's all, the entire play is just sung as rap or songs. You can download it and then memorize it. And I urge people to do that, and I did it. And without my daughter knowing anything about it, I just started playing it, and now it's the only thing she will listen to. And she has memorized. She can do.
And she's 9.5.
She's 9.5. She can do probably 95% of the lyrics, and it's been a great teaching tool. Because she's saying lyrics she doesn't know what they mean. So I will sit down, I bought the libretto, and we'll go over the lyrics, and I say, do you know what it means when he says in loco parentis?
Yeah.
You know, well, in place of your parents. He's being raised by these knuckleheads. This is Hercules Mulligan is saying he's not being raised by. So anyway, the point is that the masterpiece that he has created connects with people, because he spent years and years finding the perfect line, as he talks about, for each of these things, and the lyrics are just reach you, and you know, if you watch it, if you go see it, whatever the price, I guarantee within about 5 minutes you won't be thinking about the price. You'll be thinking, this is the most amazing thing that I've seen, and you'll just see song after song, and when you see it all together, it's just amazing. So yes.
So if you want to learn to convince people and you can't stomach listening to Donald Trump's speeches, go and see Hamilton, get yourself a copy of Language Intelligence, and learn all about it. And we're going to need to if we're going to convince people on climate, because we've got a very uphill battle ahead. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. This has been TYT. Thanks for watching.